The universe thrummed with the coldness I'd come to know so well. A bone-deep chill no furnace could vanquish. It was the emptiness that consumed you, out here in the black. Our ship, the Harbinger, looked like a skeletal fish against the panorama of the void. A relic of another age, held together by welds and prayers. She was no fancy liner, that was for damn sure. I stood on the observation deck, a thin sheet of viewport glass all that separated me from the infinite chill of space. I should have been back in the crew quarters, offloading sleep debt from the last hyperspace jump. But something wouldn't let me. A prickling on my skin, like something was watching us with hungry eyes from the dark. "Beautiful, ain't she?" A gruff voice broke the silence. Johnson, the ship's engineer. A bear of a man, thick arms scarred and burn-pocked. He leaned on the railing beside me, the soft light of the distant stars glinting off his shaved skull. "Like a graveyard," I mumbled back. Johnson let out a rumbling chuckle. "That's 'cause you ain't never seen real beauty up close, boy." He nudged me with his elbow. "This here, this nothingness, it's where everything starts, everything ends. Just a matter of perspective." He had that faraway look in his eyes old spacers get. I'd always thought him a few bolts short of a full engine, always spouting that half-philosophical nonsense. But out here, something about the vastness, it did make you a touch existential. "Think we'll find anything out here, Johnson?" I asked, more to myself than to him. "Always something to find, kid. Just gotta know where to look." He slapped me on the back, the force almost knocking me off my feet. "We're prospectors, ain't we? Ain't no shame in striking out, but by God, the day we come back empty-handed is the day I stick my head in a fusion reactor." His booming laughter rattled through the cramped deck. I managed a weak smile. Johnson always knew how to cut through my pessimism. The truth was, even if we found a motherlode of precious minerals, it meant little. The corporations back home would bleed us dry, and we'd be back out in the black, risking our necks for another minuscule payout. "Incoming transmission, Captain wants everyone on the bridge." The intercom crackled to life, a woman's voice, crisp and official. "Lieutenant Harris, all regulations and spit polish." She and I never got along. Johnson nudged me again. "Looks like fortune's finally smiling on us, kid. Get yourself to the bridge, double time." He was right about one thing. Out here in the cold expanse of the void, any change was a welcome one, even if it led us straight into the belly of the beast. The bridge of the Harbinger wasn't a sight to behold. Cramped, utilitarian, a mess of wires and ancient panels held together by faith and duct tape. Captain Vargas, a leathery old man who'd been out in the black longer than I'd been alive, sat hunched in his command chair, eyes fixed on a display. "Finally decided to crawl out of your hole, I see," he grunted as I entered. His voice was like sandpaper on metal, roughened by years of recycled air. "Lieutenant Harris sounded urgent, sir," I said, trying to keep the annoyance out of my voice. Vargas waved a dismissive hand. "Transmission came in garbled, something about a signal, dead system, rogue planet." He squinted at the display, cursing under his breath. "Damn thing's ancient tech, boy. We're out here on a fool's errand, I'm telling you." Harris, positioned by the comms console, shot me a glare. I returned it with a smirk, just enough to raise her ire. She was all by the book. Me, well, let's just say I found the book needed a few updates. "Picking up a consistent energy signature from the planet, sir," Harris reported, her voice tight. "Doesn't match anything in the database." "A mystery. How thrilling," I muttered. Harris ignored my jab. "The readings suggest—" She hesitated. "Artificial origin, Captain." That got Vargas's attention. He sat up, his weathered face twisting into a scowl. "Artificial? On a dead rock? Someone playing games with us?" "Reckon it might be worth a look, Cap." Johnson lumbered onto the bridge, wiping grime-covered hands on his overalls. "Ain't hit nothing but dust clouds for weeks." Vargas stroked his bristly chin, calculating. The lure of the unknown, that was what brought us out here, what kept a lot of us going. Even a dead signal beat the crushing emptiness day after day. "All right," he finally declared, Change course. Prep the descent pods. Parker. He fixed me with a beady eye. You and Johnson suit up. See what's making all that racket. The planet loomed in the forward viewports, a blotchy sphere of brown and grey against the star-speckled black. An unwelcoming sight, made even more ominous by the silence. This place wasn't supposed to have a heartbeat, yet here we were. The descent pod was cramped, smelling of sweat, recycled air, and the faint hum of ancient life support. Johnson cracked his knuckles, the sound deafening in the tiny space. "Remember, kid," he rumbled. "Out there, things ain't always what they seem. Keep your head on straight and your blaster ready." I nodded. Johnson made it sound like a Sunday jaunt, but I'd heard the old wives' tales about rogue planets, the things that supposedly lurked dormant on them. The pod shuddered as it broke atmosphere, flames licking the viewport. The surface rushed up to meet us, a vista of craters and dust. We targeted a massive chasm, a gash in the planet's skin, where the energy readings were strongest. Impact rattled my teeth. We'd landed. It was time to find out what secrets this dead world held. The pod door hissed open, releasing a wave of cold, stale air that stung my nostrils. I stepped onto the surface, my boots crunching on the dusty ground. The yawning chasm stretched before us, its edges jagged and uneven. "Well, I'll be damned," Johnson breathed. "Look at that." Below, lining the interior walls of the chasm, were structures, not natural formations but geometric shapes, metallic and gleaming against the dull rock. We couldn't see the bottom, just a continuation of this impossible architecture plunging into the darkness. "Comms check," I said, my voice tight in my helmet. Static crackled, then Harris's voice. "Reading you loud and clear. Stay frosty down there, Parker." The worry was evident in her usually crisp tone. "We're going in," Johnson declared, already securing a repelling line to the pod's anchor point. "Suits up, kid. Time to earn your pay." The descent was nerve-wracking. The chasm was far deeper than it appeared from above, and my insides tightened with every meter we dropped. Finally, our boots hit something solid. We stood on a wide metal platform, part of a labyrinthine network of walkways clinging to the chasm walls. I fought back a surge of vertigo. One false step, and it was a long way down into the abyss. Johnson scanned the area, his blaster rifle held at the ready. "This place gives me the willies," he muttered. "Never seen nothing like it." "You think those lights mean something?" I gestured towards an array of blinking panels lining a nearby wall. "Beats me. You and your fancy schooling, maybe you can figure it out." Johnson had always been a touch resentful of those with formal training. Out here, it wasn't book learning that kept you alive, but gut instinct and battle-hardened skill. I crouched by the panel, suppressing a shudder. The interface was unlike anything I'd ever encountered. No recognizable symbols or language, just swirling geometric shapes that seemed to shift before my eyes. "Parker to Harbinger. Any linguists in the house?" I asked, frustration tugging at me. Nothing about this expedition was turning out as routine as we'd hoped. "Negative, Parker." Vargas's voice crackled back. "You're on your own down there." "Well, ain't this just peachy?" I reached out, my finger hesitating above the glyphs. There was no telling what would happen, but we couldn't just stand around gawking like a couple of greenhorns. My fingertip made contact. A jolt of energy surged through me, making my vision swim. For a heart-stopping moment, the world seemed to tilt, and then something shifted. One of the massive metal walls slid open with a groan, revealing a passageway leading deeper into the planet's heart. Johnson whistled low. "Well, kid, looks like you just won yourself a field trip." His voice held a mix of awe and unease. "Might as well see where the rabbit hole leads," I said, trying to sound confident. Truth was, fear clawed at my insides. Every instinct screamed that we were walking into a trap. But we were prospectors. We didn't shy away from the unknown, even when it stared back at us with eyes of cold steel. The passageway was surprisingly well lit, glowing strips embedded in the floor and ceiling casting a dim, bluish light. "Think this place is still active?" I asked. more to combat the unsettling silence than out of a real need for an answer. Johnson snorted. "Only one way to find that out. Keep your eyes peeled, Parker. Don't like the feel of this one bit." We moved deeper into the planet's belly, the passageway twisting and turning without logic. The scale of the operation was mind-boggling. Whoever built this place hadn't skimped on space. After what felt like hours, the passageway finally opened into a cavernous chamber. It was dominated by what looked like an assembly line, massive robotic arms gliding with precise movements along vast conveyor belts. "What the hell?" Johnson let out a bewildered breath. We'd stumbled upon some sort of automated factory. But factory for what? I didn't have a chance to ponder the question. A sudden whir of machinery ripped through the silence, followed by a blinding flare of light. Blinking back spots, I saw that a section of the assembly line had surged into life. Robotic arms, previously still, now jerked into motion, grasping for components hurtling past on the belts. "Parker, get back!" Johnson's shout was cut short. My body moved on autopilot, diving for cover just as a searing beam of light sliced through the air where I'd been standing. It punched a hole clean through the metal wall behind me. I scrambled behind a stack of crates, my heart pounding against my ribs. Sparks showered down as the robot arm continued its deadly laser sweep, oblivious to our presence. Johnson opened fire on the machine with his blaster. Bolts of energy bounced harmlessly off the arm's metallic hide. With a horrified jolt, I realized the blaster fire was drawing its attention. "Johnson, no!" I yelled, but it was too late. The arm swiveled with unnatural speed, fixing its glowing red sensor upon him. The laser flared again, this time finding its mark. Johnson's scream cut off abruptly as his body vaporized into a cloud of ash. The acrid smell of burnt flesh filled the air, mingling with the oily scent of overheated machinery. I lay frozen behind the crates, my mind reeling from the shock of Johnson's sudden, brutal death. Then, a cold rage ignited within me. These damn machines had killed my partner, and for that they would pay. I peeked around my cover. The assembly line rumbled on, oblivious to the carnage it had wrought. But somewhere, something was orchestrating this, controlling those arms with deadly precision. Staying low, I darted from cover to cover, the whine of machinery a constant threat. The cavern was enormous, filled with a maze of assembly lines and towering structures. Finding my way through this mechanical nightmare wouldn't be easy. A flash of movement caught my eye. On a catwalk suspended high above the factory floor, something moved in the shadows. A figure, too humanoid to be another machine. I squinted, straining to make out the details through the gloom. The figure paused, seemingly looking straight down at me. A chill ran down my spine. Had it sensed my presence? Cursing under my breath, I pressed myself against a towering conveyor belt, hoping luck was on my side. The seconds ticked by in agonizing slowness. The figure didn't reappear. Had it been my imagination, an illusion born from fear and flashing lights? No time to second-guess myself now. I slipped back into the labyrinth, blaster at the ready. If there was someone controlling this place, they needed to know they weren't the only predator in this metallic jungle. My progress was slow, hampered by caution. The assembly line I'd stumbled upon was just one of many. I wove through them, the factory floor a surreal landscape of lights and machinery. And then I saw it, a massive metal sphere nestled in the heart of the complex. Cables, thick as my torso, snaked into its gleaming surface. A control center. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps sent me ducking for cover. Two robed figures strode past my hiding spot, their muttering too low to decipher. Human, at least they looked it under those heavy cloaks. Working for whoever was behind this. Cultists drawn to this technological marvel. Questions buzzed through my head. They stopped in front of the sphere, muttering what sounded like some ritual chant. One of them raised a hand, a flash of light searing across the sphere's surface. Instinct took over. I surged from cover, firing my blaster on the run. The robed figures whirled in surprise. My first bolt caught one in the shoulder, sending him sprawling in a heap of dark fabric. His companion shrieked, raising his hands towards me. but I didn't hesitate. Another blast reducing him to a pile of ashes, just like Johnson. My blaster was still smoking when the silence descended, broken only by the relentless hum of the machinery. It felt too quiet, too anticlimactic after the burst of violence. The reality of what I'd just done hit me. I'd killed 2 men. Yes, they'd been caught up in something dangerous, twisted. But something about gunning them down in cold blood bothered my conscience. But there was no time for introspection. The sphere, whatever its purpose was, still thrummed with dormant power. I had to find a way to shut this entire operation down, avenge Johnson, and get the hell off this forsaken planet. I circled the sphere, my boots clanging against the metallic floor. Access ports lined its side, sealed tight. Damn. I wasn't an engineer, but it didn't take a genius to realize brute force wasn't going to work. A glint of metal caught my eye. One of the fallen cultists had dropped something, a small metallic device. I scooped it up, turning it over in my hand. A key of some sort? This had to be connected to the sphere. I fumbled for an access port, my hand shaking as I tried to match the device's shape to one of the openings. With a click, it slid into place. The sphere reacted instantly. The lights dimmed, the cables sputtered, and the thrumming that had been a constant backdrop faded away. One by one, the assembly lines ground to a halt, the robotic arms freezing mid-movement. A ripple of unease passed through me. Was it over? Or was this just the beginning? Suddenly, a tremor ran through the floor. Alarms blared, a harsh, atonal screech that pierced my ears. The ground beneath my boots began to shift, rising and falling in waves. "Hell's bells!" I swore, scrambling for purchase on the tilting floor. All around me, the factory seemed to be coming apart at the seams. Massive panels groaned and buckled, revealing sparking wires and glowing chasms of molten metal. The control sphere split down the middle, revealing a dark cavity within. And from that darkness, something rose. Not a man nor a machine, but a creature, a skeletal frame of metal fused with organic matter. Its eyes burned with a crimson light. It was unfinished, incomplete, a product of this assembly line of horrors. Johnson was right, I muttered, the icy grip of fear coiling around my heart. Sometimes it's better not to know what's out there. The creature screeched, an inhuman sound that vibrated in my bones. It bounded from the sphere, its movements impossibly fast. I had just enough time to raise my blaster and squeeze off a shot. The bolt of energy swept harmlessly over its streamlined form. This wasn't a fight I could win. Not alone. Time to use the only weapon I had left, my legs. I bolted through the collapsing factory, the creature a relentless predator hot on my heels. The deafening roar of disintegrating machinery filled my ears as catwalks buckled and massive support beams rained fiery debris. Blind instinct guided my feet. There was no strategy here, just a frantic need to put distance between myself and that abomination. I stumbled, my breath rasping in my lungs, and the creature closed the gap with terrifying speed. I hurled myself down a plunging walkway, landing hard on a lower level that was teetering on the edge of a molten abyss. The creature, unable to stop its momentum, sailed cleanly over the edge and vanished with a shriek into the glowing depths below. I slumped against a railing, gasping for precious air. "Parker! Parker, can you hear me?" The crackle of a comm unit pierced the chaos. "Harris!" My voice was barely a croak. "Where the hell have you been?" "Reading a lot of strange energy signatures, Parker," she replied, a worried tremor in her typically composed voice. "Vargas wanted to investigate before risking a retrieval. Can you give me your location?" I stumbled back to my feet, surveying the destruction. Far above, I could see the faint glimmer of the passageway I'd come through. "I made a mess down here, Lieutenant," I admitted. "The whole place is coming apart. I'm making my way back up." "Vargas is launching an emergency pod. It should punch through whatever's scrambling our comms. Try to make it to the chasm." "Roger that." The climb back to the surface was a grueling ordeal. The planet seemed intent on swallowing me back into its metal heart. Explosions rocked the structure, and I was forced to double back multiple times as entire sections collapsed into oblivion. Finally, gasping for breath and covered in grime, I staggered back into the chasm. Above, A tiny speck of light bloomed in the darkness, the rescue pod screaming through the atmosphere. Hope surged through me, but my relief was premature. As the pod punched through the chasm wall, its descent slowed not by thrusters, but by thick, writhing cables that burst from the rock, wrapping around the pod like monstrous tentacles. I watched in horror as they dragged it towards a crack in the chasm wall that hadn't been there before. "No," I whispered, a single word that held the weight of despair. The chasm walls trembled as some gargantuan force wrenched itself free. I staggered back, shielding my eyes from the dust and grit kicked up by the tremors. My survival instincts, honed by years in the unforgiving black, screamed at me to get as far away from this nightmare as possible. But something else urged me on. Whatever horror was down there, it had taken the pod, and likely any survivors. I wasn't the type to leave people behind. When the dust settled, the fissure glowed with an angry crimson light. It was wide enough now, a gaping wound in the planet's face, revealing not rock or magma, but something different. It looked like a vast organic cavern, its walls glistening with an obscene sheen. "What in the seven hells?" I muttered. This wasn't just a factory, it was something far worse. A breeding ground, a monstrous womb birthing those metal-flesh hybrids. There was no time for terror. I had to get off this rock, find help. I fumbled for my comm unit. "Parker to Harbinger, do you copy?" Silence. "Damn it, come in, Harbinger." Nothing but static hissed back. Frustration surged, mingling with a sense of dread. Every second counted. I sprinted to where my own pod had been anchored. Nothing left but shrapnel and the rappelling line, swaying gently against the chasm wall. It might not hold, but it was my only option. I hooked myself to the line and rappelled down the chasm wall, the descent a scramble against the shaking rock face. Chunks of debris showered down, and I flinched as something hot and viscous splattered across my face shield. Didn't even want to think about what it was. My boots hit the metal platform with a clang. I cast a look towards the fissure, where a writhing, bulbous mass was starting to spill forth. Disgust warred with fear as my gaze caught on something. The rescue pod, half submerged in the organic ooze, twisted and mangled. No survivors. There was a slim chance someone made it. Someone thrown clear by the crash. I couldn't leave without checking. I turned and bolted for the wreckage, trying to ignore the monstrous shape emerging from the fissure. If I didn't hurry, there wouldn't be anyone left to save, including myself. I scrambled over jagged metal, the stench of molten rock and burnt flesh stinging my nostrils. The rescue pod was a mangled heap, its hatch ripped open. Despair threatened to engulf me, but then a faint groan pierced the sounds of the collapsing factory. I clambered closer, heart pounding, and found a young crewman, his face pale and bloody, pinned beneath a twisted piece of metal. Brooks? He wasn't someone I knew well, just another crew member on a ship full of faces. But right now it didn't matter. He was alive. "Parker!" He coughed weakly. "Thought I was a goner." "Hang in there," I grunted, muscles straining as I wrestled with the metal. "We're getting out of here." With a final heave, I dislodged the debris. Brooks slumped to his side, gasping for breath. "Easy there," I urged, helping him sit up. "Got any broken bones?" He shook his head weakly. "Just a few bruises. We need to reach higher ground. Get a signal out." "The comm unit's fried," I reported, tossing him the defunct device. "There's an emergency beacon on the pod," Brooks wheezed, pointing. "Short range, but should boost the signal if we can get it online." We rummaged through the debris, finally uncovering a battered metal box. The activation switch sparked, then surged to life. "Might work," I said, securing the beacon to my backpack. "We need high ground to get a decent signal." Brooks nodded. The only way was up. We hooked ourselves to the rappelling line, the platform swaying precariously as tremors rocked the chasm. Every groan of metal sent chills down my spine. As we ascended, I noticed movement in the depths below. A metallic shape slithered out from the fissure, its body gleaming with organic fluids. It uncoiled, rising from the depths like some kind of twisted serpent. Its head was an abomination, a fusion of bone, metal, and flesh, a single crimson eye blazing at its core. "Faster!" Brooks shouted above the din. I climbed, the thrum of the creature sending tremors through the chasm. We were halfway up when the serpent lunged, its head, disproportionately large on its slender body, shot upwards, snapping at the line. I cried out as the metal cable snapped, sending us tumbling. Scrambling to my feet, I staggered towards the far end of the platform, where the chasm wall jutted outwards. "Brooks!" I yelled. "Over here!" He appeared below, dazed, but miraculously unhurt. "The beacon!" he shouted, tossing it up with surprising strength. I fumbled for it, securing the pack and scrambling towards the edge of the chasm. We exited the factory just as the serpent thing was ramming the platform, intent on pulverizing anything in its path. "That way!" Brooks gasped, pointing towards a series of barren hills. "Should have a line of sight!" We ran, the creature gaining on us. It wasn't built for speed on land, but its long strides closed the gap with terrifying swiftness. The only thing in our favor was the crumbling terrain, hindering its pursuit. The hills were agonizingly close, but as we crested the first rise, a cold realization swept over me. Even if we got the signal out, rescue wasn't guaranteed. Whatever lived in the bowels of this planet, we might not be able to fight it alone. "Almost there!" I panted, pushing my legs to their limit. Behind us, the creature hissed and thrashed, dislodging rocks that tumbled down the hillside. Brooks stumbled, a cry of pain escaping his lips. "Damn my ankle!" "Keep going!" I yelled over my shoulder. To stop now, to hesitate, meant death. He gritted his teeth and limped onward, his face twisted in a mask of pain. If we managed to get a signal, there was no guarantee the Harbinger could outrun what lurked below. It might not even be possible to land safely. The summit of the hill came into view, a flat expanse of rock offering an unobstructed view of the black expanse of space pinpricked with stars. One of them had to be our ship, our only hope. Brooks collapsed onto the rocky outcrop. He fumbled with his comm unit, but there was only a feeble crackle of static. "Not getting anything!" "The beacon," I urged. "Get it activated, and pray the Harbinger's even out there." He nodded, pulling the beacon pack from my shoulders and powering it up. A thin beam of blue light shot skywards. "Parker!" Brooks's voice shook. "Look!" My blood ran cold. The creature had changed tactics. Its pursuit had slowed, its segmented body twisting and reconfiguring as it clung to the hillside. Organic pistons pumped, metal groaned, and before our horrified gaze, it transformed. Aerodynamic wings unfolded from its back, and its segmented middle compacted into a streamlined form. With a deafening screech, it launched itself into the air, no longer shackled by the rough terrain. "Come on, come on!" I clambered to my feet, scanning the sky for any sign of the Harbinger. "Harris, Vargas, for the love of God!" The creature was gaining speed, a deadly missile honed in on our position. And then, a glimmer of reflected starlight caught my eye. The Harbinger, finally coming into view. It was tiny, distant, but it was there. My heart leapt with hope and fear. Could we warn them in time? Brooks's voice crackled through the comm unit, barely audible over the creature's approaching roar. "Harbinger, this is Brooks. Do you read? Emergency extraction required. Repeat, emergency extraction required." He repeated the message, a frantic mantra against the creature's impending attack. There was no response, just the deafening silence of space. We were out of time. The winged creature bore down on us, its single crimson eye blazing. And then a miracle. A burst of laser fire streaked across the sky, striking the creature mid-flight. It shrieked in outrage, its trajectory disrupted. "Hang on, rescue inbound!" A voice boomed through the comm. Vargas. Relief and gratitude washed over me in equal measure. The Harbinger swooped into view, a reassuring behemoth against the vastness of space. A smaller pod detached, hurtling towards our hilltop. "We're gonna make it," Brooks grinned, his voice a mixture of disbelief and elation. "Don't count your chickens yet," I muttered, glancing at the creature circling back in fury. The Harbinger was close, but the creature was closer. It was going to be a race to the finish line. The rescue pod slammed into the hillside, kicking up a cloud of dust that momentarily obscured our vision. The creature shrieked in fury, circling like a giant bird of prey. We had mere seconds. "Let's go!" I yelled, hauling Brooks to his feet and sprinting towards the pod. His injured ankle slowed him down, each step a grimace of pain. The hatch hissed open, revealing a face crinkled with worry. Miller, a young engineer I vaguely recognized from the crew roster. "Parker, you're alive! And what the hell is that thing?" He pointed a shaky finger towards the circling creature. "No time to explain!" I shoved Brooks towards the pod. "Get us off this rock!" Miller hesitated for only a moment before scrambling back into the pilot's seat. The engines roared, and the pod shot into the sky just as the creature swooped, its razor talons raking the metal hull. Sparks flew, but the pod held. I sank back against the interior wall. Brooks, slumped beside me, let out a long, weary sigh. We were safe, for now. But I couldn't shake the image of the creature circling the pod. We docked with the Harbinger in a bone-jarring jolt. The airlock whooshed open, and Vargas strode in. "Report," he barked, fixing his gaze on me. I took a shaky breath. It was time to reveal the full horror of what lay below. "It's not a factory, Captain," I began, the words spilling out of me in a torrent. "It's some kind of nest, a birthing ground for those metal flesh monsters. And whatever's down there, it's big, real big." Vargas swore, his weathered face paling. "And this flying abomination?" "It changed," Brooks cut in, his voice still trembling. "Reconfigured itself for flight." Vargas ran a hand over his face. "This ain't some simple salvage op no more. This is..." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "This is a whole new level of hell. We can't just leave, Cap," I said. "There might be survivors down there, and who knows what those things will do when they hit the void." Vargas shook his head. "We need a plan, son. We're a damn salvage ship, not a battleship. Let's get the crew together, figure this thing out." He gestured toward the flight deck. Miller slumped into the pilot's chair, his face tight with exhaustion and fear. Vargas gathered the rest of the crew, a small, ragged bunch of miners and mechanics. He laid out the situation, his voice filling the cramped flight deck. Every word painted a picture of a horror far beyond anything any of us had been prepared to face. "Options," Vargas said after outlining the nightmare below. "Any ideas? No matter how crazy, let's hear them." A wave of unease swept the room. Nobody spoke, eyes darting between each other. "Can the ship outrun them?" Brooks spoke. Vargas snorted. "They fly, boy, and those were just the newborns. Who knows what else is brewing down there?" The silence in the flight deck was stifling, a suffocating weight no one dared break. "Well," Vargas grunted, his voice gruff with tension. "Anyone got a bright idea that doesn't involve us getting roasted alive or becoming some freak show's next exhibit?" A ripple of dark chuckles spread through the room, a nervous reaction in the face of the impossible. My own stomach twisted into knots. I pictured the creature circling in the depths below, the crimson glow of its eye. Those things were relentless. Suddenly, movement on the main view screen caught my attention. A cluster of blips, growing larger, fast. "Incoming ships," Miller yelled, his voice tense. "Unknown origin, trajectory." He trailed off, fingers flying over the console as he zoomed in on the readout. "They're not matching any known configurations." Vargas shouldered him aside, squinting at the display. "Whoever they are, they weren't invited to this party." The first ship broke through the atmosphere, a gleaming silver needle against the bruised sky. It was followed by others, a small fleet taking formation. Their arrival shifted the dynamics of our predicament, adding a new element of uncertainty into an already volatile mix. "Friendlies! More scavengers drawn to the energy signature," Brooks wondered aloud, mirroring the question on everyone's minds. "One way to find out," Vargas said, a dangerous glint in his eye. He slammed a fist on the comms panel. "Open a channel, wideband transmission." The crew scrambled into position, the hum of powering systems filling the tense silence. Vargas cleared his throat, his voice booming through the speakers. "This is Captain Elias Vargas of the Harbinger. Identify yourselves and state your intentions." A burst of static. Then a voice crackled back. It was smooth, devoid of emotion, filtered through some translator tech. "We are the Valar. This world is of interest to us. You are advised to vacate the vicinity immediately. Your cooperation will be appreciated." Vargas scoffed. "Appreciate this!" He gestured to Miller, who triggered a pre-programmed message, a multilingual warning signal, blasting a declaration of territorial claim and a strongly worded suggestion that the Valar find themselves another rock to plunder. The response came swiftly. The lead Valar ship shuddered, and a beam of searing energy lanced out, striking a nearby asteroid. The space rock vaporized in a blinding flash, leaving behind a haze of shimmering dust. "Well, that was diplomatic," Brooks muttered sarcastically. Vargas's face was set in hard lines. "Looks like we got ourselves a fight, boys and girls. Miller, prep the main cannons. Anyone with combat experience, suit up. And let's give these Valar bastards a taste of good old human hospitality." The crew burst into action, the fear of the unknown momentarily eclipsed by the adrenaline surge of a pitched battle. I found myself moving on autopilot, strapping on my cobbled-together armor, the weight of the blaster in my hands a familiar comfort. Beside me, Brooks fumbled with his gear, his injured ankle slowing him down. "This ain't what I signed up for," he griped. "None of us did," I said. But survival sometimes meant picking up a weapon, even if it wasn't in your original job description. Through the viewports, the Valar fleet maneuvered into attack formation. They were graceful, undeniably beautiful in a cold, deadly way. But as I watched, a wave of revulsion crashed into me. Whatever purpose had driven the creation of the monstrosities below, these Valar seemed to share a disturbingly similar aesthetic. Were they connected? Or was this planet a wretched magnet for those who sought to defile the natural order? The first bolt of energy flared from the Harbinger. The battle was about to begin, and with it, perhaps the final bloody chapter of our misadventure would be written among the stars. The Harbinger shuddered under the Valar onslaught. Energy blasts hammered against our shields, sending sparks cascading through the cramped corridors. "Hull breach, Sector G!" Miller's voice crackled over the comms, laced with panic. "Repeat, hull breach!" Vargas swore. "Parker, Brooks, get down there, seal off the breach, buy us some damn time." He slammed a hand on a control panel, and bulkhead doors slid shut, isolating the compromised section of the ship. I exchanged a look with Brooks and we sprinted towards the breach, the ship groaning and lurching under our feet. Chaos reigned in Sector G. Smoke choked the air, and the flashing warning lights painted the scene in an eerie crimson glow. Through the gaping hole in the hull, I saw them. Valar soldiers. Not hulking brutes, but lithe figures clad in gleaming silver armor, their movements eerily graceful. They poured through the breach, deadly weapons in their hands. "Open fire!" I yelled, raising my blaster. The confined space transformed into a maelstrom of energy blasts and shouts. Brooks, gritting his teeth against the pain of his injured ankle, fought beside me with surprising ferocity. The Valar didn't seem to register pain. One, hit by a direct blast, staggered, but merely shook its head as if shrugging off a minor inconvenience. Their precision and focus were terrifying. "Hold the line!" Vargas's voice boomed through the comms. He was buying us time. A Valar warrior broke through our fire, its armor shimmering as it deflected bolts of energy, heading straight for Brooks. "Look out!" I shoved Brooks aside, the warrior's blade grazing my arm. Pain flared as it sliced through my suit, but it wasn't a deep cut. In that split second, I saw my opening. I lunged, tackling the Valar and sending us both tumbling. We grappled on the metal floor, a desperate struggle of human versus whatever these beings were. The Valar was surprisingly strong, its movements eerily fluid. I slammed my fist into its helmet, trying to stun it, but the material was unyielding, barely registering the impact. A blast of heat seared past my ear as Brooks fired from behind. The Valar stumbled, allowing me to wriggle free. Just then, the warning blared over the comms. "Emergency venting sequence initiated!" Vargas's voice cut through the din. "Get out of Sector G! Now!" Without hesitation, Brooks and I scrambled to our feet, sprinting back towards the closing bulkhead. I glanced back just as the heavy pressure doors slid shut, sealing us off from the exposed section. Through the small viewport, I watched as the Valar were sucked into the void, limbs flailing uselessly against the merciless force. It was a brutal end, but there was no room for pity. It had been them or us. We slumped against the bulkhead, gasping for precious air. Sweat trickled down my brow, mingling with the blood from the shallow cut on my arm. I glanced at Brooks, who was mirroring my ragged breathing, his face pale. "That was a close one," he said, a shaky grin spreading across his face. "Too close," I agreed. We'd survived the boarding party, but it had been a narrow victory. We returned to the bridge, battered and bruised, the adrenaline rush of survival fading into a bone-deep weariness. The rest of the crew was a grim sight: burns, hastily bandaged cuts, the collective trauma on their faces. Vargas sagged in his command chair, the fight seemingly drained out of him. "Casualty report!" he barked, but the question hung in the silence. There were too many empty spaces, faces we wouldn't be seeing again. Miller, his voice choked, ran through the list. We'd lost a third of our crew, not just to the Valar boarding party, but to the relentless bombardment hammering the Harbinger. Our shields were failing, the ship's structural integrity compromised. I searched for Harris among the survivors, a sudden pang of guilt washing over me. In the chaos, I'd nearly forgotten all about her. Seeing her stoic form amidst the wounded was a relief amongst the desolation. "They hit engineering," she reported, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Main power conduits are shot. We're running on auxiliary and those won't last long." "What about those fancy Valar weapons?" Brooks piped up. "Anything salvageable?" Vargas shook his head. "Tech's too advanced. Our systems can't even interface with it. We're sitting ducks out here, folks." We'd come so far, endured so much, only to be stranded, outgunned, and out of options. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Plot a course back to command space. We lay low, refit, and then we bring the big guns down on this place." A murmur of agreement rippled through the bridge. We were prospectors, not soldiers. This fight, it wasn't ours to win. Not alone. "It won't be easy," Harris cautioned. Her eyes narrowed in thought. "Those Valar ships are fast. They'll likely intercept us before we reach safety." Vargas slammed his fist on the console. "Damn it, I know the odds. But staying put is suicide. If we run, we might stand a chance of getting back with enough firepower to settle this." His words held a grim sort of logic. We couldn't save those we'd lost, but we could damn well try to prevent more deaths. It was a decision born out of desperation, not bravery, but sometimes retreat was the only sane option left on the table. "Miller, prep for emergency maneuvers," Vargas ordered, a fire reigniting in his eyes. "Plot a course, maximum burn." The crew rallied. We'd faced horrors down on that planet, seen our own mortality reflected in the crimson eye of those metal flesh monstrosities. But we hadn't been broken. We were battered, wounded, but still breathing. As Miller laid in the new course, his fingers flying over the console, I couldn't shake the feeling we were merely postponing the inevitable. The planet below, the Valar. Their conflicts felt far too ancient, too powerful to simply ignore. Our return, if we managed it, would likely just herald a new, bloodier chapter in this cosmic conflict. The Harbinger shuddered under the strain of maximum burn, the groans of overtaxed systems a constant reminder of how close to collapse we teetered. Through the viewports, the Valar ships shrank to angry specks of light against the vast backdrop of space. Had we outrun them, or were they merely biding their time? The escape filled me, not with triumph, but a sense of unease. The planet, with its organic heart and the winged creature, felt like an infected wound, festering in the dark. It wouldn't be forgotten. When we'd finally dropped out of hyperspace far enough away to catch our breath, the bridge descended into a flurry of hushed debates. We were adrift, wounded, and carrying a secret that could burn entire systems. "Command won't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole," Brooks muttered, the pessimism thick in his voice. "They'll label us troublemakers, blackball the whole crew." "So what do we do?" Miller asked, his youthful face filled with worry. "We can't just wander back into civilized space and spill this over a drink at the local spaceport." Vargas rubbed his stubble-covered jawline, his weathered face creased in thought. "We need leverage, something those desk jockeys at command won't be able to ignore. And that means someone with deep pockets and even deeper ambitions." I felt a jolt of unease. "You mean the corporations?" I said slowly, "selling out to the highest bidder that doesn't sit right." Harris stepped forward, her gaze steady. "It isn't ideal, Parker, but it's reality. Those cores, they have the tech, the firepower to deal with this threat. We owe it to the crew we lost, to everyone on that planet." Her voice faltered slightly. "To make sure their deaths weren't in vain." We all carried the ghosts of our fallen comrades, their faces flashing in our minds. It was a grim calculus, sacrificing our ideals for a chance at preventing even greater bloodshed. "All right, let's do this," Vargas said, his voice decisive. "But we do it smart. No direct comms, no traceable channels. We find a broker, someone with connections and a healthy appetite for risk." The plan started to take shape. We pooled our knowledge, meticulously documenting every detail. The factory, the creatures, the Valar involvement. We were painting a target on a world and on ourselves. But sometimes the only way to survive the fire is to become a spark yourself. Through a labyrinth of back channels and coded messages, we found our middleman. A shadowy figure known only as the Collector. Reputation was everything in the murky underbelly of the void, and the Collector was said to trade in secrets, bartering information to the highest bidder. He set the terms: a rendezvous on a remote outpost, a barren rock infamous for its illicit dealings. The Harbinger limped towards the rendezvous, her weakened systems holding together through sheer stubbornness. Each hyperspace jump felt like a gamble, but luck, or perhaps sheer desperation, was on our side. The outpost materialized before us, a hive of metal and neon clinging to desolate asteroids. As we docked, I couldn't shake the feeling we were walking into a predator's den. The Collector was waiting, an unsettling figure draped in shadow, his voice a synthesized rasp. "You come bearing intriguing wares," he stated. Vargas stepped forward, the data slate clutched tightly in his calloused hand. "Enough to shake the foundations of empires," he growled, "but it comes at a price." The negotiations were tense, a dance with the devil in the dim light of the docking bay. The Collector was a master manipulator, testing our limits. Yet as he absorbed the fragments of our harrowing tale, his distorted voice betrayed a growing excitement. This wasn't just information, it was a potential gold mine, a weapon in the ongoing clandestine wars waged between corporations. In the end, a deal was struck. Credits, enough to refit the Harbinger 10 times over, flowed into our accounts. It felt like blood money, payment for turning traitor to the very ideal of exploration that had brought us to this forsaken corner of the galaxy. Yet, as we watched the outpost recede, there was a grim satisfaction. The war would continue. The corporations, the Valar, and perhaps even Command, they would all descend upon the rogue planet, driven by greed or duty, or a twisted mix of both. But we had played our part. We had lit the fuse, and now we could only watch the inevitable explosion from afar, hoping the fallout wouldn't consume us all. Years later, the Harbinger was barely recognizable. No longer a battered prospector ship, she gleamed with corporate-funded upgrades, military-grade shielding, weaponry that could make a cruiser blush. Her crew quarters weren't cramped bunks anymore, but reasonably spacious cabins. We even had a damn mess hall that served actual food instead of the usual rehydrated rations. Yet beneath the sheen of wealth and comfort, an undercurrent of unease lingered. The nightmares still came. The winged creature's shriek cutting through my sleep. Brooks's chronic limp was a constant reminder of the price we'd paid. It was on one of those sleepless nights that Vargas summoned me to the bridge. He stood before the viewport, not gazing at the familiar constellations, but at a single, unremarkable star. "That's where it is," he said, his voice gruff with unspoken emotions. "The corporations razed it to the ground, just like we knew they would." "And the Valar?" I asked, hesitant to break the fragile silence. "Who knows? Turned to dust, scattered across the void, or maybe regrouped to strike back someday. Doesn't matter now." He turned, his gaze pinning me down. "We did what we had to, Parker. Dealt with the devil to get the firepower needed." I thought of the data slate we'd sold, the knowledge that had unleashed a corporate war on that planet. "Feels like a hollow victory, Captain." He let out a bitter laugh. "Ain't no such thing as clean hands in this business, son. Best we can hope for is to live to tell the tale." I knew he was right. The Harbinger had become a gilded cage, our crew bound not by idealism, but a strange cocktail of guilt, mercenary pragmatism, and the lingering fear of what might still lurk in the corners of the universe. The reports filtered in over the comm channels. Cessation of unknown energy signatures on the planet. Declarations of victory from faceless corporate entities. It felt eerily anticlimactic, the end of a cosmic horror story reduced to a stock market surge and bureaucratic memos. "New contract came in," Vargas said one day, tossing me a data chip. "Deep space survey, some uncharted system, supposed to be quiet work." I took the chip, its cold weight settling heavily in my palm. Quiet wasn't a word I liked much these days. "Guess we're not made for retirement, huh?" Vargas clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Some of us aren't, son. But there's always another corner of the void to chart. Another mystery waiting out there. Might not have monsters spitting acid," he said with a wry grin. "But who knows? Maybe the next job will strike gold. The real stuff this time." There was still a spark in his eyes, a stubborn refusal to succumb to the creeping cynicism. I mirrored his grin. Maybe he was right. Maybe there was still room for a prospector's spirit in this scarred galaxy. After all, hadn't we already survived a world teeming with nightmares? We were gamblers, after all, forever chasing the elusive promise of fortune in a universe that could break or build you with a spin of the cosmic wheel.